Good afternoon, friends. Today's Friday, and I'm still gonna try and film our field trip Friday. But you know what? Right now it's raining outside, and so I thought I'm gonna go ahead and record a story, and then you'll have your story. And if it's not too rainy, I'm gonna go and film our field trip Friday, which I think will be a lot of fun because I'm gonna go look for animals in trees. And I'm hoping that you've done that this week too. Or maybe this weekend you could go looking, okay, just like I'm going to. So for right now, I'm going to go ahead and read you a story. And if I can get outside and it's not too rainy, I will send you another video today for my field trip, okay? So the story I picked out is called The Biggest Apple. And I picked this story because right now we're learning about trees, and next week we're going to be learning about some of the food that comes out of trees. Okay, so in this story you're going to find out a little bit more about apples and where do apples come from. They come off trees. Remember when we went on the field trip to see the apples at my house? We have a little orchard with some apple trees. So we're going to read this story called The Biggest Apple Ever. And if you look at it, it looks pretty big, doesn't it? So let's find out. Let's find out who the author of this book is. That means the person who wrote the book. It says by Stephen Krall. And it illustrated by Jenny Bassett. She's the person who made the pictures. She's called the illustrator. Okay. So let's open it up and find out what's going to happen. Oh, I see some trees here. I think these look like apple trees. There's lots of little red, looks like little red apples all over them. Once there were two mice who fell in love with the same apple pie. But you had to be there to see how it happened. They fell in love with a pie? That sounds pretty silly to me. On opening day at Mouseville School, the principal, Mr. Mouser, made an announcement. We will be learning about apples this fall. And to get things started, we will have a contest. Whoever brings in the biggest apple to his teacher will win a special prize. The judging will take place on Friday. Good luck to everyone. So they have to try and find the biggest apple. I have an apple tree in my backyard, said Penelope. I bet it has really big apples. There's an apple tree across from my house, said James. I'm going to climb it as soon as I get home. I don't have any apple trees, said Clayton, but the house mouse, but I'm going to find Mrs. Mousley the biggest apple ever. No, you're not, said his friend Desmond, the field mouse. I am. Oh, yeah, said Clayton. Yeah, said Desmond. All the way home on the school bus, Clayton and Desmond talked about the contest. Maybe I could grow an apple tree with really big apples, said Clayton. It takes too long, said Desmond. I hear Mrs. Mousley say 6 years. I'll think of something, said Clayton. So will I, said Desmond. When Clayton got off the bus, he sneaked back into town to see what Penelope and James were up to. Penelope had come down from her tree. She was carrying 2 tiny apples, 2 tiny ones. James was still up in the tree across the street. He was picking very small apples. Clayton knew he'd seen bigger ones at the market. When Desmond came by a little later, he realized the same thing. Looks like they're having some trouble finding a big apple, doesn't it? The next day at school, Penelope and James brought in their tiny apples. No one else had brought in anything. Mrs. Mousley cleared her throat. Class, We have a lot of work to start the year, but because we're learning about apples and having an apple contest, we will go to Barnaby's orchard this afternoon." Everyone got very excited. "I'm going to find the winning apple," said Clayton. "I'm going to find the winning apple," said Desmond. At the orchard, Mrs. Mousley pointed out 2 different kinds of apples. Then everyone disappeared into the trees, looking for a winner. Clayton walked down one row, craning his neck. Desmond walked down the other row, craning his neck. Then Clayton saw what he thought was a really big apple. It was a little too high to reach, but he stretched for it. Oh! At that moment, Desmond saw the very same apple on the very same branch, and he stretched for it too, so he reached his arm out for it too. They bumped heads and fell down. "I think we should bring this apple in together," said Clayton. "No one said we couldn't," said Desmond. But when they got back to the bus, James had an apple that was even bigger. The apple was so big, he could hardly carry it. Clayton and Desmond looked at each other. What would they do now? Here's the biggest apple right there, it looks like. That night at dinner, Clayton explained the problem to his dad. Said Dad, "apples don't come in too many sizes. Do you think you'll find a bigger one?" "I don't know," said Clayton. "Then maybe James will win the prize this time. It's okay if he does." Over at Desmond's house, Uncle Vernon said exactly the same thing. But Clayton and Desmond were still determined. The next afternoon, they met at Barnaby's orchard. They picked 2 huge baskets of apples, but nothing they found was bigger than the apple that James had picked. "You know," Clayton said, "I think Dad was right. This time James gets to win, but we've got all these apples. Why don't we bake a big apple pie?" Desmond laughed. "Great, let's bake the biggest apple pie ever, and we will make it for our class." Clayton nodded. "And I think I know where we'll find a pie pan that's big enough." The following afternoon, Desmond arrived at Clayton's house with Uncle Vernon. "Everything is packed up and ready," Clayton said. "It's all in Dad's truck." "But where are we going?" Desmond asked. "You'll find out in a minute," said Clayton. "I wonder where they're going. Look at all the apples in their truck." Dad drove with Clayton and Desmond beside him in the front seat. Uncle Vernon stayed in back with the apples and the other ingredients for the giant pie. As they came around a corner, Desmond gasped, "Tony's Pizza?" "Of course," said Clayton. "What could be better than a giant pizza pan?" Mr. Tony greeted them at the door. "Welcome, welcome. We are ready to begin." And so they got to work making the dough for the crust, kneading it, rolling out half into a big circle, and spreading it over the deep dish pan. See, they put the crust inside the pan. Then everybody peeled and sliced the apples, mixed together the sugar and the spices, and spread the rest of the dough on top. "Wow," said Clayton and Desmond when they were done. "Wow, wow, wow." "An hour," said Mr. Tony. "Give me an hour." The giant pan just fit into his huge oven. The next day was Friday. Who would have the largest apple? James, of course, and Mr. Mouse handed him the prize, a cheddar cheese apple. Mrs. Mousley looked surprised. "Clayton, Desmond, nothing from you?" The 2 of them grinned. At that same moment, the classroom door flew open. In came Clayton's dad, Uncle Vernon, and Mr. Tony, struggling to carry the giant pie by themselves. "How wonderful," said Mrs. Mousley. "That's the biggest apple pie ever." "We made it for the whole class," said Clayton. "All of us together," said Desmond. They shared a high five, and everyone in the class had a big slice. That looks delicious, doesn't it? Well, I think we learned a little bit of a lesson from that story, that it's okay if we don't win every time. Just like when we play a game, sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. That's okay, isn't it? We can't win every time. So it looked like they made the most of that, and they created something for their whole class to share. And that was a great way to be part of the contest, and to also make a special time for their family, or for their school friends to have. So I thought that was a pretty fun story about the biggest apple ever, and seeing that great big apple pie. That must have been quite a thing to see. All right, well, that is all for today. And like I said, I will try and film a video today about, or out in the woods, looking for some animals in the trees. So look for it later, and if I'm able to do it, I will send it on to you later today. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.